Broadcasting from deep behind enemy lines in the occupied territory of the Socialist Republic of California, your host, former California State Assemblyman and Governor candidate, Tim Donnelly.
Hey, you can't make this stuff up. The campus crazies are doing a 1 million student march. It's spreading all across the country. The Mizzou madness is taking out administrators at colleges far and wide, all for supposed crimes of ignoring complaints of racial intimidation and harassment that are really difficult to quantify, and almost no one, other than anecdotes from individuals, has ever witnessed any of this or can provide photographs or video or any evidence whatsoever. But they call it microaggression. And the LA Times has written an article on it. It's hard to believe that in a country where we have largely resolved the racism that has plagued every country. But in America, we took a proactive stance. I mean, we fought a war to end slavery. It wasn't the only reason. It had a number of reasons, but that was one of the biggest ones. We formed a political party, the Republican Party, that today can't even put forth a black candidate without being criticized by Democrats who forget their own history. They were the party of slavery. If you're a Democrat, you need to proudly look in the mirror and say, hey, my party was the party that defended and wanted to expand slavery across the country. Just keep that in mind while you're getting all holier than thou, putting on your holier than thou face in the morning to go demonize Republicans. The Republicans, on the other hand, left the Democrat Party. They left the Whig Party. They left the Know Nothing Party to form the Republican Party in order to end the greatest evil of our time, or of their time, excuse me. But now it's not enough. If anyone has ever said anything offensive to you that you can possibly characterize as being related in any way, shape, or form to race, and you got to follow me here because it's not completely clear what these students want. But if you can in any way tie this into what you consider to be a racial incident, then I guess you want to be able to go to the authorities and you want to bring down hellfire missiles on whoever it was that offended you. I don't know where else in life this works. You go to work. If anybody who manages people knows the biggest problem with any enterprise is managing people and keeping people, helping them get along, keeping them on task, holding them accountable without being overbearing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let me just read you a little bit of this LA Times story because I can't believe we are actually dealing with any of this in 2015. But this is the new victimization mentality that is alive and well on our campuses. USC junior Vanessa Diaz was raised in Dallas, but at a party 2 years ago, she was asked if she could speak English. When Diaz became offended, the other student tried to pass off the question as a joke, but it did not amuse her any more than the idea of Mexican-themed parties on Greek Row featuring students in sombreros and fake mustaches. Wow. I mean, somebody needs to shut down this kind of partying and, I don't know, maybe confiscate, the sombreros and mustache. We're not talking about lynchings going on here. We're not talking about racist acts that are evil and despicable and happened in this country. We're talking about people who are just looking for a reason to be offended. Because of the society we live in, it's not okay to be overtly racist, Diaz said. Well, that's not true. You can be overtly racist as long as you're racist against whites. That's the bottom line. If you hate white people, we'll put you on TV. We'll give you your own show. We'll put that into movies. If you can characterize the Republican Party as the party of old white people and denigrate it and consistently trash and ridicule conservatives who happen to be white, that's okay. That's not racist. Some call it the new face of racism, not the blatant acts of bias that recently led to, I can't even buy into that. I'm not even going to read that. Instead, a phenomenon known as microaggression. Everyday slights and snubs, sometimes unintentional, is drawing widespread attention across college campuses and kicking up a debate about social justice and free speech rights. Now, mind you, these are the people who are regularly shutting down free speech. As a matter of fact, we'll play you a clip a little bit later on. We played one yesterday, but I've got a shorter, clearer version of it, where the professor at the University of Missouri, who was a professor of media, she's since resigned from that position, but she's still employed by the university, found out today. So you have two individuals who are in the administration, the president and another fellow, that have resigned. And I agree completely with Donald Trump's assessment. They never should have resigned. It was stupid and irresponsible for them to resign. He called it disgusting. Let me find you his exact statement. Well, in typical Trump fashion, he said, "I think it's disgusting." Trump said in an interview on Fox Business News, "I think the two people that resigned are weak, ineffective people. I think that when they resigned, they set something in motion that's going to be a disaster for the next long period of time." And look, the last time there was this kind of unrest on campuses, I told you it reflected very poorly on Jerry Brown's dad because he couldn't get it under control. Ronald Reagan, who was a candidate at the time, took a very hardline, tough stance, and then when he became governor, held that stance and maintained order on the college campuses so that the students who were paying to become prepared for life or careers or wanted to get their dollar's worth and be able to go attend their classes, he fought for them. He fought for the taxpayers, for the ordinary people. He was not shutting down free speech. He was balancing the need for the university to operate and individuals to be heard. And right now we are seeing, I believe it was Claremont McKenna. Now, someone there has stepped down, the chairman or regent or whatever, and this is all live. It's all happening now, today, all over these campuses. And when we come back, I'm going to have a clip for you, but I'm also going to read you I'm going to read you the statement now. This is the statement from the activists because I want you to ponder this. "We are people of all colors, genders, and sexual orientation, and we are united to fight for education as a human right. These protesters are calling for tuition-free public college, cancellation of all student debt, and a $15 minimum wage for all college workers, plus a lot of other stuff about straight white male patriarchy and the rape culture on campus." That's what this is all about. They want someone else to pay the bill while they bitch and moan about their privileged life. I mean, after all, they are at college. They are not in prison. Anyway, 323-746-TALK. We will take your calls and bring you more of The Tim Donnelly Show right after this message. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about this campus crazies. I don't know what else to call them. The Million Student March is what they are characterizing it as. And they want, here's what they want in short order. They want a $15 minimum wage for everyone on college campuses and pretty much everyone in the world. They want all of their student loans paid off by the top 1%. You're talking $1 trillion there. They want to fully tax the 1%. They want to take 100% of their income away from them. And they have their defenders in the LA Times. They call it the microaggression movement. If anyone ever offended you, and you can characterize it as race-related in any way, you have a righteous grievance, and you should be able to throw people out of their jobs who had nothing to do with it, except that somehow loosely you declare that they have some responsibility for the campus climate. I guess they want a climate change. Anyway, we're going to run a clip of an interview of one of these so-called student leaders on Fox News, and just listen closely to how little she understands how the actual real world works. It's a bit shocking.
To the details of what really they're asking for here. Kelly Mullen, a Million Student March national event organizer. Kelly, good to have you. Keely, I'm sorry. Is it Keely or Kelly?
That's okay. It's Keely.
I apologize. So what do you want here? What do you want?
Well, so the movement, the Million Student March, is a movement for a more equitable and fair system of education, as opposed to the really corporate model that we have right now. So the three core demands of the National Day of Action are free public college, a cancellation of student debt, and a $15 an hour minimum wage for people who work on the campus.
And how's that going to be paid?
Great question. I mean, so I'm not sure if you're talking on like a national level or at particular schools. I can sort of touch on both. At
well,
my
if you wanted
university,
all that
Northeastern
stuff,
University,
someone asked to pick up the tab. Who would that be?
The 1% of people in society that are hoarding the wealth and really sort of causing a catastrophe that students are facing. I mean, we have a relationship right now where 1% of the population owns more wealth than the 99% combined.
All right, so if the 1%, Kelly, if the 1% just had their taxes raised a few years ago, back to almost 40%, then to pay for the health care law, they had them raised another few percentage points. Then they had their deductions limited to raise another couple points, where depending on the state or locality, they're pushing over about 50% in taxes. How much higher do you think? How much more do you think they should pay?
I think enough until we have a system where not 1 in 2 American families are threatened with poverty.
So where do they go? Let's say if you tax them, they're smart folks, these people, these 1% hoarders, right? So if they leave here, then who's going to pay for all this stuff that you want?
If they leave
the country.
I mean, there's always going to be a 1% in the U.S. The U.S. is like the bastion of capitalism and its success, and I think
Do you think the 1% could pay for all of this?
Absolutely. 85 people in the world hold more wealth than half of the global population.
No, wait a minute.
I mean,
are we talking about 85 billionaires, or are you extending this to the 1% or whomever who earn a little bit north of $250,000? At what level, Keely, do you start saying you got to pay a hell of a lot more than you're paying now in taxes?
I mean, I think people earning, certainly people earning over $1 million a year should be contributing to the wellness of society.
If it's 50% now, let's say it's around 50% with taxes. We used to have a top rate of 90%. You think we should get back to that?
I mean, I think that eventually we will get back to that. I think eventually.
You're okay with that? Are some of your friends okay with that? Do some of them want to be successful themselves, and they'd be happy when they get to a level, maybe over 200,000, 250,000, they start paying 90% in taxes on that? They'll be happy with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that
Keely, come on, you're talking to me here. Your friends are going to be happy getting to a point in their career when they can look outside and say, finally, I'm able to pay 90% in taxes.
Obviously, people in your position, don't want to pay 90% in taxes.
I dare say, unless you're high as a kite. you wouldn't volunteer to pay 90%, right? I mean, unless you really did see a considerable bang for the buck and it was worth it, right? But a lot of the times you realize it's not worth it, and given some of the track records we've seen with government, it doesn't always work, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But the reality is we have to look at the injustice of the system as it exists right now.
Then do you think maybe if everyone paid a little bit more for this, would you pay a little bit more for this, besides the rich, to pay for that it's worth it? That you think these are good goals?
People already are paying for this.
No, I asked it differently. I asked you, would you, Keely, and your friends, and your mom, and your dad, and your family, would they happily pay more to provide all of these benefits you just outlined?
Of course, and we already are.
No. You just said to pay for some of the things you wanted, the rich should pay significantly more than they're paying right now. Now you're telling me...
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Everyone's already paying.
Well, they're not. I mean, now you're saying for these added benefits that you want, and they're fine benefits, don't get me wrong. You think your friends, their parents, your family would be happy to pay a little bit more to provide these guarantees and benefits.
I come from an incredibly working class family, and my family is already on numerous forms of government assistance and is basically scraping by, in order to get me through college. I live in a world and I see a system around me where there's a population that's doing nothing to contribute to the progression of society. Education is really the only way that we have innovation, that we have...
I'm sure you sound very smart. You know what's going on. You mentioned what's going on in the world. You're probably aware what's happening in Greece and these other countries that provided all these benefits and then some, many of which you outlined very nicely here for us today. And they're going broke, and they're out of money, and they don't know what to do. And their people are riding on the streets because they can't believe the money's gone, and the benefits and the promises are gone.
Right.
What do you think?
I mean, there's a global catastrophe right now of complete defunding of social services and
because they ran out of money. What happened, Keely? They just ran out of money.
Yeah.
Right?
I understand, but there is a 1% in Greece. There's a 1% in the United States. There's a 1%. There's a ruling class in absolutely every...
I don't doubt there is, Keely. I don't doubt there is, but obviously they've been trying to tap them to get money from, and they realize either they don't have the money or they hid from the money. They're gone. They're gone. Yeah. And now these countries are going
nuts. Those people need to be accountable.
All right, fine, but they're smart and they're scurrying all over the globe. So now even if
they are, and that's a problem.
All right, but they've done studies on this, Kill. I don't want to get boring here. But even if you were to take the 1% and take all of their money, tax it 100%, do you know that couldn't keep Medicare, just Medicare in this country, going for 3 years? Did you know that?
If we're to a point where the rich is paying 100% on their taxes, then we're on the road to socialism, and we're going to have a completely different type of public infrastructure.
No, what I told you is that even if you took all the money from the rich who you say are getting away with murder, and you took it all away, it wouldn't support one entitlement in this country for 3 years.
I don't believe that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just don't. That sounds completely ludicrous to me.
You cannot make this stuff up. This is what is being... These people are protesting, and they have no idea about reality. They have no idea that it takes everyone who is working and the money that is taken from them to support this massive entitlement society. And this girl's own family is on government assistance, and she doesn't seem to understand that you cannot steal everything from those who create the jobs and then hope there'll be jobs and wealth for the future. Anyway, this is the Million Student March. We're going to get into Ted Cruz coming up. Is he a viable candidate? We'll talk about it right after this. Expect the attacks to be ramped up against Senator Ted Cruz. He has struck a nerve. He is definitely becoming someone that the establishment is beginning to see as a threat. There's an interesting article at Politico.com written by Rich Lowry. Ted Cruz gets no respect, at least no respect in keeping with the impressiveness of the campaign he's built and the increasing odds of winning the Republican nomination. The press and the political class are finally beginning to catch up to Cruz's strength. And there's been more talk of a prospective Cruz-Marco Rubio race over the past 2 weeks, but his coverage and his buzz has been lagging indicators, and they're still lagging. Bottom line is Trump's hogging all of the airwaves, but Cruz, this is a guy that when he talks, he's crystal clear, and he took on a major issue. Nobody else would even touch it because they wanted to play it safe. And listen to how Ted Cruz handles the issue of whether or not he would have bailed out the big, massive, monolithic banks that now make up that 1%.
Senator Cruz, on that theme, Facebook data shows that over the last month alone, nearly 1 million people, nearly 1 million, have been concerned about reining in Wall Street, apparently believing that some have not been punished enough. So as an accomplished litigator yourself and a former Solicitor General, would you go after the very people who believe and fear that Wall Street has ignored? In other words, the crooks that Bernie Sanders say have gotten away with a financial murder?
Absolutely, yes. You know, I've spent much of my adult life enforcing the law and defending the Constitution. And the problem that underlies all of this is the cronyism and corruption of Washington. You know, the opening question Jerry asked, would you bail out the big banks again? Nobody gave you an answer to that. I'll give you an answer. Absolutely not. And what we have right now is we have Washington, as government gets bigger and bigger. You know, the biggest lie in all of Washington and in all of politics is that Republicans are the party of the rich. The truth is the rich do great with big government. They get in bed with big government. The big banks get bigger and bigger and bigger under Dodd-Frank, and community banks are going out of business. And by the way, the consequence of that is small businesses can't get business loans. And it is that fundamental corruption that is why 6 of the 10 wealthiest counties in America are in and around Washington, D.C. Now, let me give you a contrast to Washington cronyism. Some weeks ago, a woman named Sabina Loving testified at a hearing that I chaired in the Senate. Sabina Loving is an African-American single mom who started a tax preparation business in the south side of Chicago. She found a storefront. She wanted to have her own business. She started a business. But then the IRS promulgated new regulations targeting tax preparers. They did it under a more than 100-year-old statute called the Dead Horse Act. Now, this statute and the IRS, in classic Washington crony fashion, had exemptions for lawyers and big fancy accountants, but Sabina had to pay $1,000 an employee. It would have driven her out of business, and Ms. Loving sued the IRS. She took the Obama IRS to court, and she won, and they struck down the rule for picking the big guys over the little guys.
Senator, I really want to be clear here. Are you saying, sir, that if the Bank of America were on the brink, you would let it fail?
Yes. Now, let's be clear. There is a role for the Federal Reserve. What the Fed is doing now is it is a series of philosopher kings trying to guess what's happening with the economy. You look at the Fed, one of the reasons we had the financial crash is throughout the 2000s, we had loose money, we had an asset bubble, it drove up the price of real estate, drove up the price of commodities, and then in the third quarter of 2008, the Fed tightened the money and crashed those asset prices, which caused a cascading collapse. That's why I am supporting getting back to rules-based monetary system, not with a bunch of philosopher kings deciding, but tied ideally to gold.
Sir, I understand that. I just want to be clear, if you don't mind, that millions of depositors would be on the line with that decision. Well, and I just want to be clear. If it were to happen again, for whatever the reason, that you would let it go. You would let a Bank of America go.
So let me be clear. I would not bail them out, but instead of adjusting monetary policy according to whims and getting it wrong over and over again and causing booms and busts, What the Fed should be doing is, number one, keeping our money tied to a stable level of gold, and number two, serving as a lender of last resort. That's what central banks do. So if you have a run on a bank, the Fed can serve as a lender of last resort, but it's not a bailout. It is a loan at higher interest rates. That's how central banks have worked. And I'll point out, look, we had a gold standard under Bretton Woods. We had it for about 170 years of our nation's history, and enjoyed booming economic growth and lower inflation than we have had with the Fed now. We need to get back to sound money, which helps in particular working men and women. What Washington does, the people who are doing well in the Obama economy are those with power and influence in the Obama government. The people who are hurt are working men and women, and that's who we need to fight for.
Neil, that's the difference of being an executive. And let me just explain. When a bank is ready to go under and depositors are getting ready to lose their life savings, you just don't say we believe in philosophical concerns. You know what an executive has to decide? When there's a water crisis, how do we get water to the city? When there's a school shooting, how do you get there and help heal a community? When there are financial crises or a crisis with Ebola, you got to go there and try to fix it. Philosophy doesn't work when you run something. And I got to tell you, on-the-job training for President of the United States doesn't work. We've done it for 8 years, and almost 8 years now, it does not work. We need an executive who's been tried, has been tested, and judge the decisions that that executive makes. I don't like what the Fed is doing, but I'll tell you what worries me more than anything else. Turning the Fed over to the Congress of the United States so they can print the money. That would be a very bad approach for them.
So, Governor Kasich, why would you then bail out rich Wall Street banks, but not Main Street, not mom and pop, not Sabina Loving? Well, you just said an executive knows to step in and bail out a bank.
They were talking about what you would do with depositors. Would you let these banks shut down? My argument is going forward, the banks have to reserve the capital so that the people who own the capital start pressuring the banks to not take these risky approaches, Ted. But at the end of the day...
So you said you'd abandon philosophy and abandon principle, but what would you do if the bank was failing?
Because if during...
What would you do if the bank was failing?
I would not let the people who put their money in there all go down.
So you would bail them out?
No. As an executive, I would figure out how to separate those people who can afford it versus those people are the hardworking folks who put their money in those institutions. Let me say another thing. Here's what I mean by that. When you are faced in the last financial crisis with banks going under and people who put their life savings in there, you got to deal with it. You can't turn a blind eye to it. Now, going forward, that's one thing. If you had another financial crisis, perhaps there would be an effort to make sure that...
The contrast between Senator Ted Cruz, who makes incredibly articulate points, who explains the role of the central bank, who takes a daring position, and look, it's a position that makes sense. After the government bailed out the banks all became more powerful because there were fewer of them. And that made capital harder to obtain, capital meaning money, loans for small businesses. But anyone who was already big, they simply took up the slack. It's like that moment in the movie It's a Wonderful Life where George Bailey is talking to the Mr. Potter, the guy that basically anytime there's a crisis, he buys up everything. And he talked about how he saved the whole town. And George Bailey says, yeah, well, people say you stole the whole town, which is what he did. He came in and used the crisis because he was the only one with money. He was the only one with all the connections to the government officials. And that is exactly why there's so many people have completely lost faith in government. The next generation, the millennials, they don't have any faith in government. They have faith in each other. They don't have any faith in government. And Ted Cruz, I believe, is going to attract and bring into the Republican Party an entirely new demographic they've been losing. And I don't think they'll they'll understand why. I'm going to get more into why Ted Cruz could be a serious threat when we get back from this break. 323-746-TALK if you want to get in on the action. Is Senator Ted Cruz a viable threat? We're going to go straight to your phone calls and see what you think. Hey, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't calling about Cruz, but I wanted to talk about the Missouri State thing really quick.
No, that's fine. Give me first name and city.
Jeff, and I'm from Salt Lake. Just barely moved to Southern California.
Okay, great. Yeah, what is your take on this whole campus craziness?
I fear Donald Trump is right. There's a major war going on in the gay and lesbian community that has launched on the LDS or the Mormon Church. I'm now seeing petitions going around, people signing them to boycott BYU football games, and they want to present this to the NCAA and threaten any school that chooses to play BYU. Now, we've seen how spineless administrators are, and they would say, geez, we don't want this party coming to our campus. Yeah, we won't put BYU on the schedule.
Yeah, and see, when you cancel a football game, if University of Missouri had canceled the game they were about to engage in, it would have cost their school $1 million. They're not small stakes that are up for grabs here. This is major power. This is a major power struggle. And look, whatever happened to live and let live? Why can't the Mormon Church and the Catholic Church and the Christian Church and the Jewish faith and the Muslims and everyone else, why can't they believe however they want to believe without someone trying to silence them or punish them or literally drive them out of existence and force them to do things against their beliefs?
But one of the arguments that they're using is they want gay and lesbian people to be married in the Mormon temple, and they're going to the NCAA, and they're going to say they hate gay people, so therefore we need to boycott the games. If this happens, I pray America wakes up and realizes how under siege we are right now.
See, I'm one of those conservatives who's extremely libertarian. And I believe that everyone has civil rights. It's not that we're going to give them civil rights, but everyone has civil rights. So everyone can go and get a civil union from the government. That is a fact. But Absolutely. When it comes down to using the government to force the church to perform a sacrament against its own beliefs, see, that is a First Amendment issue. That takes it away from this whole gay issue and lesbian, transsexual, transgender, whatever, LBGT, and it turns it into an entirely different matter. It's a constitutional matter. It's a matter of whether or not we have a First Amendment or whether or not you can use the government as a tool to force your beliefs on others, including going into a church and forcing them to violate their beliefs.
Scary, isn't it?
This is 2015. This is what is happening in 2015. And people are so terrified. We've been talking for days now about political correctness. Political correctness has strangled the ability for the average person to just speak up without being called a hater. Well, I don't know what is next. I don't know if we lost Jeff. Are you still there? Oh, well, I didn't do anything. He must have dropped off. Unfortunately, I was enjoying the conversation with Jeff, who is a recent transplant from Salt Lake. He must be the only person who has moved to California in the past year, because everyone else is leaving, and you can understand why. Because a lot of these ideas that they're spreading all over these campuses started here. But let me get back to Ted Cruz just for a minute, because it kind of ties in. This article that's up at Politico.com by Rich Lowry, who, by the way, is the editor of National Review. His name should be very familiar to you. It makes some really good points that the media hates Ted Cruz. They consider him divisive. They consider him to be this troglodyte that holds views that are illegitimate. And the left stream media has a strange bedfellow in their regard to Senator Ted Cruz, and that is the GOP establishment hate him almost more than the reporters do. So he doesn't get much coverage. But what he has done, and here's just a little litany of what he's done. He's got more cash on hand into the third quarter than any other Republican. He's got major backing from super PACs. He's assessed the anti-establishment mood of the party more accurately than any of the other traditional Republican candidates. He reacted very deftly to the rise of Donald Trump and has not turned Donald Trump into an enemy. He has watched as his key potential competitor, Scott Walker, Rand Paul, either hit a wall or badly underperform. Walker now out of the race. He has a discernible ideological and geographic base and has relatedly a path to the nomination that is simple, intuitive, and who knows, possible. And everywhere he goes, he lights up conservative audiences, gets record numbers of standing ovations. He's an excellent debater, and he simply doesn't make tactical or rhetorical mistakes. And because the media hates him so much, that could redound to his benefit. Certainly. So, you know what? They can ignore him, but they ignore him at their peril because the left stream media has their gun sights set on Donald Trump and Ben Carson. They've got those guys in the crosshairs, and they're not even seeing Cruz sneaking up through the brush. And it could get very, very interesting after Iowa. So Senator Ted Cruz is certainly someone to watch, and we will continue to do that for you here at the Radio Free California Network. And when we come back, we're going to have Sheriff Paul Babu, Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu. He's a border sheriff, and he has a lot to say about Obama releasing all these criminals into his backyard. We'll be right back. You have found your way to the Radio Free California Network. I am your host, Tim Donnelly, former California State Assemblyman and radio governor here in California. 323-746-TALK is our number. And we will be joined here momentarily by Pinal County, Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu, who is he's taking the fight and has always taken the fight to the airwaves and to the president. President Obama began releasing 46,000 criminals, claiming they were all low-level nonviolent drug offenders. And of course, we know that isn't true. The last 6,000 were just released, many into Sheriff Babu's backyard. I want to welcome to the show Pinal County Sheriff Paul Babu. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Tim, thanks for having me on, my friend.
It is great to have you on. And by the way, is it true? I read in, I believe it was on Fox News. Are you seeking a seat in Congress? Are you putting your name out there?
I am. We're running for an open seat. It's currently held by a Democrat, and we're going to flip it to make it a Republican seat here in the 1st District of Arizona. And
well, this is the time to do it. If there was ever a time to flip a seat, this would be it, and you are the man to do it. I remember when you came out to California, we drove out to, I believe, Newport Beach, and we were in the car, and then we came out here to the high desert for a fundraiser. In that time, but which, by the way, you headlined for me graciously, and we raised a great deal of money. But on the way there, you were on the phone. I don't know how your battery stayed alive. You were on the phone for 2 or 3 hours in the car, nonstop, raising money, talking to people, building relationships. I wish you all the best in this endeavor, because I think we couldn't have a better representative there who really, truly understands the challenges along the border firsthand.
Well, you ran and served as a patriot, not a politician, and myself as well. I'm an oath keeper, and this is where, quite frankly, the American citizens are pissed off and angry because all these people who run for office have no intention of fulfilling any of their promises that they made and betray their oaths, I believe. We've seen the president trample on the Constitution, wave his hand, grab authority and power that he himself has said he didn't have, and tipped everything up on its head here in America. And people like you and I who consider ourselves patriots, who love our country and feel compelled to do something about it, not accepting this as our future for future generations because our republic will fall. And we have to take back the power because we as a republic, citizens have allowed this to get to this point. And we have to fire these people, hold them accountable, and solve the issues of the day. That's within our ability to do that. And seeing all of our history and where we're at today, we're at a very critical point. And this president, what he's doing, releasing criminals into our communities, makes a priority the illegals and talking about prisoners and sentencing reform when he should be talking about targeting the criminals, especially the illegal criminals, and sending them out of the country. And he hasn't done that. He's, in fact, released them into our communities and victimizing untold thousands of American citizens. And he never talks to them. He never talks to the parents of the victims who are U.S. citizens, but he makes illegals the priority, and that's unacceptable.
We are, if you're just tuning in, we're talking with Pinal County, Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu, who is also running for Congress in the 1st District there. Paul, you are clearly going a different direction. The president, along with Jerry Brown out here in California, dumping criminals on the streets. Many, and the statistics show, if you put criminals back on the streets without any, well, I can't even say without any reformation. Bottom line is within 3 years, they'll commit another crime and they'll be back in the system. And we're not talking about people who committed drug offenses against themselves. We're talking about people who were smuggling drugs. We're talking about people who were committing property crimes and all kinds of other things. You are taking a very different approach there in your county, where you have actually gone after the illegal aliens who are trafficking dope into our country, and you're going after the lookouts who generally get let go and never get charged with any crimes. Tell us about that.
Well, we've just this past year alone, we've arrested 19 of these lookouts on mountaintops in my county. And keep in mind, geographically, Pinal County is between Tucson and Phoenix. So I-8, I-10 connects in my county. And so this is the number one pass-through county in the Southwest, always has been. And what's happening is we're 70 miles north of the border, so we're not even on the border. And we have these cartels. The Sinaloa cartel is the one who says that they own this portion of America. And
they own
these cartels
this portion of America. Did you just say that?
Yeah, well, that's what they purport. And it's hard to argue this fact, Tim, when they have these mountaintops that they literally control. They have binoculars. They have actual solar panels to recharge not just their cell phones. They have encrypted radios. My sheriff's office, I have 600 full-time employees. We don't even have encrypted radios until next year. So while they have protected, secure communications, they're listening to my deputies in our traffic and where we're at, so they can keep eyes on us, so they can get their drugs through my county on their way to Metro Phoenix. That's the real situation. Meanwhile, Obama has put up signs written in English in my county warning American citizens that it's not safe to travel. Danger warning, drug and human smuggling, armed gunmen. This is outrageous. This is on American soil. It's almost as if our federal government has ceded these territories. And this is where this should not be the job of the local sheriff, but it is my job. And this is where we go after them with an aggressive posture, a heavy hand of enforcement. These cartel members that we arrest, not just these scouts, because they're not carrying drugs, they're the lookouts. They get paid $100 every time a drug load gets past them. How do I know this? Because we've interrogated these cartel members that we did catch. Far more than that number got away, because they can see us miles away coming to get them. and they
can hear
all
you.
The other scouts. Yeah. So we've got 3 helicopters in my county, and we approach them all at the same time. So I'm not telling you private secrets that this is our tactics. They already know them. So we're telling them back, El Chapo Guzman and those cats down in Mexico, these criminals, these violent criminals, that you may think you own this part of Arizona, but the sheriff and our deputies are coming for you. That we're going to stand and we're going to fight these guys, and it seems at times insurmountable, and that the president has handcuffed our heroes in the Border Patrol because there's no consequence. So
see, right there, the other night in the debate, when a question was asked, what was the greatest threat facing America? I wish somebody would have just said the government, because the federal government, the state governments in many places that are under the control of Marxist progressives who are literally trying to transform our country into something that resembles countries and systems that we fought wars against. But when they handicap the Border Patrol, when Obama's dumping the criminals out on the streets, he's putting out signs telling Americans, stay away, we've ceded this territory, and the federal government's not giving you guys the encrypted radios you need, and it's also not actually being willing to support the law. They are nullifying the laws of this land and putting you and your sworn personnel at risk.
You're right. Just at the end of this week, we arrested 21 cartel smugglers, the ones carrying the drugs. And you know how many got away? Double that number. 40 got away. So I did a little press conference, and one of the reporters thought he'd be a wise guy with me and said, Sheriff, why are you so happy that you caught 21? 40 got away. So how was that success? And I said, wait a minute. I said, I had 5 deputies there. Sometimes it's hard enough to arrest one person. So I was pretty happy that we arrested 21. And so he followed up, well, where are the other 40? I said, I have no clue. In fact, 2 cars got away too. But this should be the job. The federal government should be securing the border at the border, not 70 miles north of the border. And this is where, meanwhile, the president's releasing these criminals. Every sheriff in Arizona, it's rare to have every sheriff come together in a unified voice. We did. Half of us are Republicans like me, the other half Democrats. We came out last month saying that the immigration system is completely broken. And because this president, the law applies to you and I as American citizens, but when it comes to immigration, there is no law because there's no consequence, right? And so we came out as one, saying that the system's broken. We pointed out just one day in Arizona, they released 3 violent criminals, one for aggravated assault, seriously injured a person. The two others were convicted, not charged, convicted of murder. And where do you think, Tim, they were from? What country do you think they were from?
I don't know. I'm going to venture a guess. The country to the south.
Yeah, everybody says that. Not one of them was Hispanic. Not one of them was from the Western Hemisphere. One was from Iraq, one was from Sudan, and the other was from Russia.
Wow.
Not one Hispanic. So the system's broken, and this is how we got every sheriff to come together to highlight this issue. This isn't just, all these illegals from Mexico and Central America. The entire system is completely broken. The rule of law has been undermined. This is the greatest threat to our republic.
Well, let's talk about what we can do about that when we come back from this break. We're talking with Pinal County Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu, and we'll take your calls if you dare call in 323-746-TALK. Hey, welcome back to the show. We are talking with Pinal County Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu, and we've been talking about the situation at the border. And Paul, I got a simple question. We hear all these candidates opining about what they would do to secure the border, to solve the problem of illegal immigration, which is multifaceted, as I know you're an expert at it. Donald Trump is pushing for a wall. Do walls work?
They do. And this is where I could tell you, we've talked about this before. I served 20 years in the Army National Guard, been mobilized a couple times. served a tour in Iraq, but I say more importantly, I was a commanding officer of 700 to 1,100 active duty Army and airmen down in Yuma. And even before that, in your state, in California, as a young lieutenant and a combat engineer, we're the terrain expert, and we also build structures. We built double barrier fencing south of San Diego, north of Tijuana, and these were corrugated steel, no-climb fence, meaning you can't put your fingers or your feet in there. And we actually built steel barrier 6 feet beneath the ground. So barriers do work, but a fence you have to observe it. You have to have enforcement. And that's where everybody loses this concept is, yes, you need fencing. You don't need 2,000 miles of fencing. As a terrain expert, I could tell you, you use these obstacles to complement the terrain features. You interlock them with mountains, and you place them where there's built up urban centers or there's historical proven paths of smuggling. And so you need about 700 miles of this double barrier fencing. GAO, Government Accountability Office, has come out with a report saying there's only 36 miles, that's right, 36 miles of effective double barrier fencing. So for Obama, Napolitano, and now Jay Johnson to intentionally mislead the American people to say the border is more secure than ever is a complete and absolute lie. And so that's what we need to do, build that double barrier fencing. In order to get there, you have to have, I say, 6,000 armed National Guard soldiers at the border while that infrastructure is being built, complement it with technology, and that's in sequence. And then most important than the soldiers, most important than the fencing is you need to do this. Listen closely. Enforce the law. Most important thing. Right now, there's no consequence. So it doesn't matter what fences we build, how many soldiers we have. If there's no consequence for breaking the law, millions and millions are getting this message south of the border. Make it to the border and you're home free. And that's the way it's been under Obama.
And you said that you think the failure and the undermining of the rule of law, the rule of law is the greatest threat to our republic. And I agree with you, except that I believe our government is the greatest threat because they're the ones doing the undermining. However, I'd like, go ahead.
True. And this is where, when I was telling you about those 3 illegals that we highlighted from Sudan, Iraq, Russia, the Russian stabbed a man in the chest with 2 other Russian gang members in my state. While he's still alive, they doused him with gasoline, lit him on fire in order to torture him to his death, and they succeeded.
Wow.
They released that Russian. That Russian was released in my county. So you could, if you hear anger in my voice, and you know what? They told me 2 weeks after they released him. And so what business does an illegal Russian have to do in Pinell County, Arizona, with 420,000 residents? He has no business. That's the problem here, that this president has betrayed his oath. He's touring prisons. This is what I said earlier, to lead the conversation about sentencing reform. Instead of having sympathy for criminals, instead of releasing criminal illegals that are dangerous, that are clearly going to reoffend, kill people, rape people, do all those things that they say doesn't happen, but it's going on all over the country. The person responsible for this is Barack Obama. In law enforcement, we call that an accomplice. And how do you not blame the guy who's released 67,000 criminal illegals? I'm not talking the 11 to 20 million illegals, some of which are working and maybe contributing in some fashion, right? I'm talking about the hardened criminals. He's released. The largest prison break in American history has been led by Barack Obama. 67,000 have been released in the last 2 years alone.
Wow. And I would like, instead of him visiting prisons, I'd like to see him visit the sites where Americans have been killed by illegals, like San Francisco, Pier 14, and other places throughout the state that you know about. I want to go to the phones real quick and take a question. Mike from Wrightwood, you're on with Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu. What's your question?
Hey, Sheriff, actually, I wanted to say something on what he's done. I mean, people don't understand the fact that the government doesn't give you the sources you need. And since I used to go out there and chase these guys, I profile Al-Qaeda and I sit across the table with al-Baghdadi twice. These people want to come here. The government doesn't want to give us the resources. I had 140 people one day, and I was allowed to take 20. You take the ones you can, and that's all you can do. As much as you want to pile them up and put them in there, the law doesn't allow you to do that because then you're considered mistreating them. So when the sheriff's talking about, taking what you can and the numbers that they got, you got to be within reason because you also got to make sure your men are protected. You can only take so many before it becomes dangerous.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is a great job. And the fact that we have, the leading base that we have in this country for military intelligence is sitting on the Mexican border is about the dumbest thing I've ever heard of since we always had illegals walking across. And we're talking about what he said, Russians, Al-Qaeda, they're coming here. And if somebody's been threatened by them, it bugs me that our government always, turns us into Mexicans. It's about Spanish. It's about Al-Qaeda and people coming here and destroying our country and doing wrong, hurting people and killing people. And you got vets that want to help.
Thank you for the call. We're going to have to take, I got to cut you off there because we're almost out of time. Sheriff, give us your website because I think a lot of people are going to want to support your bid for Congress. We need a voice like yours in that place. What's your website?
SheriffPaul.com, and they can go on. I post myself. There's some videos. We just had that big drug bust. Go there, watch my daily updates, and support us. If you want a patriot, an oath keeper to go, look, I don't mess around. I can't screw things up. As a sheriff, people's lives are on the line. So that's what we need, this kind of serious approach by people who have an understanding what's at stake. And I do, and anybody who is a patriot, SheriffPaul.com, and give us your support.
Thanks for coming on. We'll be right back with more of the show. I always like talking to Arizona Sheriff Paul Bebu. His website, SheriffPaul.com. If you want to learn more about him and his bid for Congress, we'll definitely be keeping you updated on that. Because, look, we have so many politicians out there that don't understand the border. They don't understand the impact. They don't understand the threat. Now, when people say terrorism and the border, everybody rolls their eyes. But when you find out that someone came into the country illegally, they came not from Mexico, not from the Middle East, but from Russia, and they killed someone and set them on fire to torture them to death, and then they're released by the Obama administration into a community. You have to ask yourself, what in the hell are they thinking? There is no justification for this. And this is just one example. There were three that he mentioned, an individual from Iraq and another place that was not wasn't Mexico. So when you think of the border, it's not just about Mexico. The border is about national security. It was President Ronald Reagan who said a nation without a border is not a nation, and it's not. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution says this is the duty of the federal government to secure the borders, to keep us free, to keep every state free from invasion. Well, that's been an epic fail. And you know what's really closely intrinsically tied to that is the fact that if you don't protect your borders and you allow unchecked illegal invasion of your country, which is what has happened, then we watch as the politicians pander to people who came here illegally, all of them except Donald Trump, who said he would deport them. And they pander and pander and pander. And pretty soon they're giving more rights, more respect, more representation to people who are here illegally, who have no right to vote, but they have more representation than you. That's why the topic of illegal immigration is such a massively important issue in this election. 2016, this is the year. This is the time when that issue, I believe, literally will determine who the nominee is. And there are some on the right who are criticizing Senator Ted Cruz, even Michelle Malkin on her Facebook page today, because he has stood for and been in favor of more HB1 visas, which is a completely separate issue. That's a legal immigration issue versus illegal immigration. However, we need to reform the immigration system itself and make it easier to navigate. We need to make it fairer to those who are actually willing to respect our laws and come here. But at the same time, we need to make absolutely certain under no circumstances will we reward those who have come illegally. Because, see, once you reward something, you get more of it. It's just human nature. It's just economics. It's not, there's nothing nefarious about it. It's not as if all of the people who've come here illegally are horrible, evil people. They're not. They're people who are here in violation of the law. And by tolerating and incentivizing and pandering to them, our government has become the greatest threat to the rule of law. And I would posit, feel free to call in and argue with me, 323-746-TALK, but I would posit that the greatest threat to America is the government. Because it's the government that is undermining the rule of law. It is not just with the border. Look at the IRS. The IRS has decided that it wants to silence the speech of people with whom it disagrees. It wishes to shut down the Tea Party, and so it intimidated, it audited, it refused to process documents that should have been handled in a month, and they took a year or longer, in some cases several years, and still never, ever gave anyone they never gave anyone, or hardly anyone, their tax-exempt status so that they could actually lobby the government or exercise their free speech, their political speech, organizing. I mean, I'll never forget when I went to a Tea Party event in Northern California at one of the original Tea Parties. And they told me that the government had insisted on the names of every single person who came there. You know what that reminded me of? That reminded me of what went on in the Soviet Union, in Russia, when people would go to a Bible study and the KGB would take down the names so they could then cart off the people to jail for going to a Bible study, for organizing, for exercising their faith. They were put in jail. That's happening here in America. That's what the IRS did. They intimidated. Now, they didn't throw anyone in jail, but they might as well have, because it had the same effect. They silenced dissent. They silenced those who wished to hold their agency accountable or abolish their agency, as is our right as Americans to express our grievances to our government. That's what was really literally at stake. Forget about the Tea Party. This is about America. This is about your right to stand in the street and not be run over by a tank. To stand up to your government and say, you know what, I want answers. That's it. That right there, the government is the greatest threat to this country. And it's continuing to grow. And it's continuing to grow because of people in positions of power within the Republican Party just as much as the Democrat Party. We heard yesterday from Trevor Loudon about the Democrat Party and the enemies within and the Marxist progressive communist movement that has literally hijacked the Democrat Party. But see, big government liberals, big government leftists, big government enthusiasts have hijacked the Republican Party. They love government. They want more government. They have no idea how they're going to pay for it. They just want more of it because they want to appease everybody. They want to make everybody feel good so that they'll get to stay in the country club a little longer. That's it. That's their entire vision. They don't have a vision of shrinking government and increasing the individual. Think about that. If we could if we could literally wipe out the IRS, and I know Ted Cruz earlier today mentioned that, but he said there were 125,000 employees. They had 97,717 employees at last count when I looked, and we don't need more than 10. So you get rid of all that. Think of the unleashing of the capital, all that money that you're not wasting, all that time you're not spending trying to comply with a government agency could be used for productive uses. Hey, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with your calls. 323-746-TALK. This is the Radio Free California Network. I am your host, Tim Donnelly, former California State Assemblyman and radio governor here in California. By the way, we are live 3 to 6 every weekday. TimDonnellyShow.com is how you can connect with us. Facebook, Twitter, email. And, of course, if you have one of those Alexander Graham Bell inventions that you are currently texting on, you can call us at 323-746-TALK, and we will bring you on air to discuss the issues of the day. We've been talking today and for several days about political correctness and how it is strangling and wiping out debate in this country. You have college students all over the country who are now involved in what they call a Million Student March. They want you to pay their tuition. They want you to pay their student loans off. They want you to pay and pay and pay and pay. They want $15 an hour, whether they deserve it or not. There is no end to their demands. They have no cognizant understanding whatsoever of the real world. I don't understand it because I worked to pay my way through college. I worked multiple jobs. I understood that I did not want to be a worker the rest of my life. I wanted to own my own business. I wanted to do something. I wanted to get an education so that I could actually do something that I would love doing for a living. Because when I was at University of Michigan, I was working and to be there every morning at like 4:30 in the laundry of the University of Michigan. And we just folded towels and folded sheets and did this over and over and over, relentlessly, monotonously. And it was drudgery. And, you know, if you were 30 seconds late back from the bathroom, they docked your pay. They put me standing there folding with a guy who was he was a zealot. That's all I'm going to say. And he would never shut up. And so he was trying to persuade me to join his cult. And I refused. And just, it was crazy. But that's what I went through just in order to pay for my college tuition to go to school. And see, as you hear me talking about this, I'm sure every one of you has a similar story of some struggle, some sacrifice, some unpleasant situation that you put yourself in to better yourself. That's the bottom line. Nothing special about me, but this next generation is being taught to claim victim status, to use the system to create more government, to seize control for no apparent reason. It doesn't make any sense. And instead of supporting the First Amendment, instead of saying, hey, let's have this vigorous, open debate, let's have the important issues discussed in front of cameras, this group, this current crop at the college campuses, under the leadership of people like Professor Melissa Click at University of Missouri, they want the media out and off campus. They want to have their own little safe zone, but they're on public land, they're on public property, paid for by the taxpayers at a public protest, but they don't want the media there. And we've got a clip from, I believe it's from CNN, and it is clip number 2. I don't know if we can, if there's any way we can pull that one up. I would love to just share that with you because I want you to hear this professor in her own words. Okay. I'm sorry. That's my bad. She is out there advocating, pushing people away from covering what they're doing. Evidently, one student decided to go on a hunger strike, and they're talking about how the reporters are putting his life in jeopardy. They're not putting his life in jeopardy. He's starving himself for a cause. He's not the first one to starve himself for a cause. And you know what? Starving yourself generally is a very slow way to threaten your life because you can go a long time without food, not as long without water. But it's so instructive to hear the mentality and the rationalization of people who have never been taught to think because they've never been held accountable for any of their decisions. And yet they want to hold the university professor, Tim Wolf, they want to hold him accountable for things he had nothing to do with, where they may have happened on his watch and he tried to do the right thing, but it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. And yet they're going out there and they're intimidating a reporter. The professor calls for muscle to come over to push this reporter away from them physically. And it is something that you have to see to believe, in fact. And, okay, we're going to go ahead and roll this clip. Go ahead and listen to this Melissa Click, professor at University of Missouri.
University of Missouri say one person is in custody for allegedly making multiple threats to the school and students. Security is back to normal this morning, but the campus is still on edge following a rash of threats and rumors on social media. One anonymous person writing, quote, "I'm going to stand my ground tomorrow and shoot every black person I see." In the meantime, a communications professor, a journalism professor, has apologized for her actions during a campus protest that brought down the school's president and chancellor. She is still on her job, but she did resign from an honorary post in the journalism department. CNN's Kyung Law has more on who she is.
Back off! Back off! Don't push me!
A confrontation between students and a student photographer.
First Amendment that protects you standing here.
Till the photographer shooting the video walks up to this woman.
You need to get out.
I actually don't.
All right. Hey, who wants to help me get this reporter out of here? I need some muscle over here.
That woman calling for muscle is Assistant Professor Melissa Click at the university's communication school. She pushes the student photographer, covers his lens, and mocks him.
This is public property.
Yeah, I know, that's a really good one. I'm a communication faculty and I really get that argument, but you need to go.
Directing students to form a human chain to block the journalists from doing their job.
Don't let those reporters in. If you've got it, oh, he's a good one. Good one. Good job.
We went to Professor Click's office to ask, why would a mass media
Well, we never got an answer from
want
Professor Click. We will be right back after these messages. Tim Donnelly Show continues. If you're hearing in the news that some crazy people took over college campuses demanding nebulous reforms that are not in the power of the university professors to grant, then you would not be alone in being confused by this and perplexed. The LA Times has an article on this. It's a whole new trend, and it's called the microaggression movement. And it has to do with anything that anyone might say to you that hurts your feelings, especially if you can in any way tie it to race or culture or ethnicity. And I was relieved to read in this article that some critics say they actually worry that the microaggression movement chills free speech, increases conflict rather than decreases, and perpetuates an aggrieved sense of victimhood. For Bradley Campbell, an associate professor of sociology at Cal State LA, said the movement is transforming society from a dignity culture in which people are taught to have thick skins and refuse to allow others to affect their sense of self-worth, to a victimhood culture that advertises personal oppression. Such a shift, he argued, could increase mental health problems and First Amendment conflicts, such as campus speech codes, and the recent attempt by University of Missouri students to bar journalists from entering a public area they deem their safe space. He also said that labeling those who unintentionally offend as aggressors seemed harsh, potentially creating more conflict and alienation among groups. Others defend the focus on microaggression as the next step forward in the country's long, slow march toward greater equality and understanding. Look, I got news for you. That word equality, that ought to be a bad word in our culture. It ain't on the Statue of Liberty. It is not in our documents. It is not the cause for which the first revolution and any subsequent ones were or would be fought. That was liberty, not equality. See, in order to obtain equality, especially in our postmodern era, the enlightened era, what I call the entitlement era, all it takes is a government program. So you just have to target someone, figure out who you're going to blame for your problems, and then figure out what price you're going to make them pay. And then you take something from them, and then you somehow mythologically make yourself whole, and that is equality. Well, this country was not founded on equality. Yes, we are all equal under the law, but we are equal. It's not something the government goes out and does for you. Yes, there were inequalities when you had people who could be owned and then people who were the owners. Yeah, that was a big problem. That it took a war and it took a long time to make the promise that we are all created in God's image. And to actually make that promise whole, yes, it took a long time. But that's not what we're facing here. And when people talk about equality, they want the right, in many cases, to do something that they have not earned the right to do. And that is a problem, because then what you're doing is you're using the government as a tool to improve your position in life. That's all. And how is that any different from corporate welfare? How is that any different from people who use the government to punish their enemies, whether they're in office or not? That's an abuse of power. And that is what this whole microaggression movement is. They are abusing power that has been granted them largely by the media and the education indoctrination establishment and the culture. Because if you have a skin color anything but white, you are automatically in an aggrieved status. And then the only job you have in life is to figure out who to blame and then go get some. And I think more and more Americans, especially Americans who might not have what is classified as white skin, who find that really offensive because they came to this country or they were born in this country to be free. And to be free to pursue whatever career they want to pursue, whatever dream they want to pursue. I mean, the whole point of coming to America is to pursue the American dream. And if you want to sit around and feel sorry for yourself, you don't even need an excuse. I mean, people have been doing that for generations, long before this whole microaggression movement came along. But if you really boil it down, how does it help you? How does it help you to spend your time being angry at somebody who's too dumb to realize what they did. Or maybe they realize, for instance, if someone, one of the examples given here in this LA Times article, let me scroll back up here, is, here it is. They did a whole training on it. University of California President Janet Napolitano, who used to be Department of Homeland Security Secretary, if you can believe that, invited faculty members last year to take training in recognizing microaggression and the messages they send. One handout, adapted from Sue's research, Sue being the person who was quoted above here, Daryl Wing Sue, a Columbia University psychology professor and leading expert on this topic, offered examples. Telling people of color they speak English well sends a message they are perpetual foreigners in their own land, or asserting that America is a melting pot denies the significance of a person's racial or ethnic experience. Hold on. Hold the phone here. First of all, if you're dumb enough to tell a person who has a different color skin that they speak English well, then you're an idiot. And you know what? After a while, you will be embarrassed into not doing that stupid behavior by the way people react to you. Next, we don't need a government program. We don't need to stop campuses from teaching. We don't need to shut down college campuses and kick out presidents because you have boneheaded idiots. Okay? And this notion that you can't say that America is a melting pot because it might deny the significance of a person's racial or ethnic experience, screw that. I'm sorry. I'm just sick and tired of political correctness and stupidity. You are enshrining stupidity. We are a melting pot. That's what makes us great. People come here from all over the freaking world to become Americans. Nobody put a gun to their head. Nobody said, go to America and celebrate your racial or ethnic significance. What a bunch of BS. You know what? People come to America to enjoy freedom so they can pursue their dreams without being harassed by the government. Now you're inculcating and enshrining and codifying into law a whole new form of tyranny that is very deeply personal and intimate and ugly. It opens up a Pandora's box of government control over speech, over employment, over how educational resources are allocated. And it's funny, because when it comes time for the harbinger of death, otherwise known as the tax man, when he comes pounding on your door on April 15th, he doesn't care what color your skin is. He doesn't care what your excuses are. He just wants his money so that he can give it out to all these idiots in government so they can then harass you and demonize you for being an American. I'm sorry. If you didn't mean to come to America, then go to wherever the hell you meant to go to. I think Christopher Columbus didn't mean to come to America. He discovered it accidentally, was meaning to go to the Spice Islands or the wherever he was going on that trade route. Somebody can call in and educate me on that. That'd be great. He didn't mean to come here, but he was sure glad he did. He found an amazing place. So, but if you're one of those people that fits into this category who's offended by the term melting pot, what is your problem? Maybe it has a lot more to do with you. Maybe you ought to look in the mirror and ask yourself, why is it that I'm offended by the coming together of cultures that then morph into the American culture and make it richer? I think that's a beautiful thing. It's even written on our money. It's e pluribus unum in Latin. It means from many, one. I don't know. You got a problem with that? 323-746-TALK. Give me a call. I would love to hear what you're thinking. I don't recognize the country in which I grew up. You know, when I went to college, and I'm sure my experience is similar to many of yours, I was from a working class family. We didn't have a lot of money. As a matter of fact, in my family, there was a real simple rule about college. Nobody else was going to pay for it but you. So you had to get a job, you had to get good grades, and you had to go out and perhaps win scholarships or get government loans. And I'm proud to say that I paid off every single penny of those loans and was happy to do so because, you know what's amazing is the government loans you the money at a very, very low rate, making it easy for you to actually succeed. So why the victimhood? Why the anger at the very system that is enabling your success? Who taught this generation that victimhood is something to be proud of? You know, all of us get our feelings hurt. All of us get offended. All of us have had experiences throughout life where people have treated us unfairly or poorly. And in many of those cases, those were watershed experiences that forced us to take stock of ourselves and figure out what we want to do. You know, there's a book out. It's been out for years called The Millionaire Mind, and I read it. It was a follow-up to The Millionaire Next Door. But The Millionaire Mind analyzed people who had become decamillionaires in their single lifetime. So they inherited nothing, and they became incredibly successful, meaning they were worth $10 million or more net worth. That means you've actually got 10 million in the bank or in assets. And then they broke down their lifestyle and their education and their background and everything. And we have a clip. I'll play it when we come back from this next break. But we have a clip of a college student who is so clueless. Who doesn't understand she doesn't understand anything about America. She was raised in a blue-collar family, which is surprising that she wouldn't know much about the country in which she was raised. But you have to have some semblance of understanding of how things work. And everybody has been brainwashed into believing that everyone should go to college. Well, if you read the book The Millionaire Mind, you probably wouldn't be pushing your kids to go to college. Because although having a college education generally speaking, does mean that you will make more money than someone who doesn't, many of the people who became decamillionaires hadn't even finished high school. And they didn't finish school because they were frustrated with it, or they needed to work because they needed to help feed the family out of sheer necessity. There was one guy in particular that wound up owning junkyards, did extremely well with junkyards. He never got past the third grade. And his teachers all told him he was going to be a colossal failure. He would never amount to anything. They said that to him over and over and over again. You will never amount to anything. So he made it his business to amount to something. And he amounted to a whole hell of a lot. He built a business, built an empire, and was worth more than any of them, all because somebody told him what he couldn't do. And instead, we are going here in America on college campuses where people are privileged. If you are able to attend a college, you are privileged. You are in the top 1% in the world. Most people will never get a chance to go to higher education. Most people never have a chance to sit around and smoke pot and discuss philosophy, for a period of time, a couple of years that you sort of take off. It's like a vacation. So sitting around and whining about it and crying about it and kicking people out of their jobs and taking over the campuses, all for what? You're not taking over the campuses to make them better for all the students who are working hard. You're taking them over demanding that somebody else pay your bill for everything. You know what? Don't take on a student loan if you don't intend to pay it back. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but the idea that you can pass on the bill to somebody else simply because you can get on television, you can get on a college campus, you can start banging pots and pans together and making a lot of noise. This is despicable. It's disgusting. I agree wholeheartedly with Donald Trump. You know what? If you don't like being on the college campus, if somebody offends you and you can't handle it, why don't you go get a job somewhere and see how that goes? Go work in a factory for a while. Then you'll have an appreciation of the opportunity that you're squandering by whining about the fact that somebody offended you. It's pathetic. This makes our country look weak and pathetic and stupid and lazy. Yeah, I said that. And if that offends people for whatever reason, I could care less. There is an inherent laziness in going out and going public with your victimization rather than actually taking stock. You know what would be much more courageous? Think about this. How about confronting the person that offended you? How about doing it in a way that could be constructive, one-on-one? How about saying, hey, you really hurt my feelings, and let me tell you why. And maybe that person will never do that again. But by doing this other thing, you've lost any rational connection to whatever it was you were fighting for. And you just sound like a bunch of whining babies. You whine about white privilege, but you have more privilege than 99% of the people in this world. 323-746-TALK. We'll be right back. If I seem a little bit intolerant today, I am intolerant. I'm intolerant of stupidity. I'm intolerant of whining. I'm intolerant of laziness. And I'm intolerant of this racial privilege. They talk about white privilege. There's a racial privilege. If your skin is anything but white, you have a privilege in this country in which no one will criticize you or tell you when you're being stupid, especially if you're on a college campus. Well, we have no such rules here at the Tim Donnelly Show, and I'm sorry. When you listen, I get it when in the 60s when people were being knocked over with fire hoses and had dogs sicked on them and were being beaten to death for standing up so that black Americans could be treated with the same dignity and human rights as everyone else. That was a righteous fight. That was a moral fight. And that was one of the most important fights that we have gone through in our country. And I'm proud of our country for that, for the fact that we now and every American enjoys equal rights. But this, sitting around and whining about some mythical racism that never happened because somebody hurt your feelings, give me a break. Now listen to this clip of Neil Cavuto interviewing a college student who claims to be a student leader, and I dare you to find anything she says that bears any resemblance to a righteous cause or anything bearing any resemblance to reality.
To the details of what really they're asking for here, Kelly Mullen, a Million Student March national event organizer. Kelly, good to have you. Keely, I'm sorry. Is it Keely or Kelly?
That's okay. It's Keely.
I apologize. So what do you want here? What do you want?
Well, so the movement, the Million Student March, is a movement for a more equitable and fair system of education, as opposed to the really corporate model that we have right now. So the three core demands of the National Day of Action are free public college, a cancellation of student debt, and a $15 an hour minimum wage for people who work on the campus.
And how's that going to be paid?
Great question. I mean, so I'm not sure if you're talking on like a national level or at particular schools. I can sort of touch on both. At
Well,
my
if you wanted
university,
all that
Northeastern
stuff,
University,
someone asked to pick up the tab. Who would that be?
the 1% of people in society that are hoarding the wealth and really sort of causing a catastrophe that students are facing. I mean, we have a relationship right now where 1% of the population owns more wealth than the 99% combined.
All right, so if the 1%, Keely, if the 1% just had their taxes raised a few years ago, back to almost 40%, then to pay for the health care law, they had them raised another few percentage points. Then they had their deductions limited to raise another couple points, where depending on the state or locality, they're pushing over about 50% in taxes. How much higher do you think? How much more do you think they should pay?
I think enough until we have a system where not 1 in 2 American families are threatened with poverty.
So where do they go? Let's say if you tax them, they're smart folks, these people, these 1% hoarders, right? So if they leave here, then who's going to pay for all this stuff that you want?
If they leave
the country.
I mean, there's always going to be a 1% in the U.S. The U.S. is like the bastion of capitalism and its success, and I think
Do you think the 1% can pay for all of this?
Absolutely. 85 people in the world hold more wealth than half of the global population.
No, wait a minute.
I mean,
Are we talking about 85 billionaires, or are you extending this to the 1%? Or whomever who earn a little bit north of $250,000. At what level, Keely, do you start saying you got to pay a hell of a lot more than you're paying now in taxes?
I mean, I think people earning, certainly people earning over $1 million a year should be contributing to the wellness of society.
If it's 50% now, let's say it's around 50% with taxes. We used to have a top rate of 90%. You think we should get back to that?
I mean, I think that eventually we will get back to that. I think eventually.
You're okay with that? Are some of your friends okay with that? Do some of them want to be successful themselves, and they'd be happy when they get to a level, maybe over 200,000, 250,000, they start paying 90% in taxes on that? They'll be happy with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that
Keely, come on, you're talking to me here. Your friends are going to be happy getting to a point in their career when they can look outside and say, finally, I'm able to pay 90% in taxes.
Obviously, you know, people in your position, you know, don't want to pay 90% in taxes.
I dare say, unless you're high as a kite, you wouldn't volunteer to pay 90%, right? I mean, unless you really did see a considerable bang for the buck and it was worth it, right? But a lot of the times you realize it's not worth it, and given some of the track records we've seen with government, it doesn't always work, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But the reality is we have to look at the injustice of the system as it exists right now.
Then do you think maybe if everyone paid a little bit more for this, would you pay a little bit more for this, besides the rich, to pay for that it's worth it? That you think these are good goals?
People already are paying for this.
No, I asked it differently. I asked you, would you, Keely, and your friends, and your mom, and your dad, and your family, would they happily pay more to provide all of these benefits you just outlined?
Of course, and we already are.
No. You just said to pay for some of the things you wanted, the rich should pay significantly more than they're paying right now. Now you're telling me...
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Everyone's already paying.
Well, they're not. I mean, now you're saying for these added benefits that you want, and they're fine benefits, don't get me wrong. You think your friends, their parents, your family would be happy to pay a little bit more to provide these guarantees and benefits.
I come from an incredibly working class family, and my family is already on numerous forms of government assistance and is basically scraping by, you know, in order to get me through college. I live in a world and I see a system around me where there's a population that's doing nothing to contribute to the progression of society. Education is really the only way that we have innovation, that we
Keely,
have.
I'm sure you sound very smart. You know what's going on. You mentioned what's going on in the world. You're probably aware of what's happening in Greece and these other countries that provided all these benefits and then some, many of which you outlined very nicely here for us today. And they're going broke, and they're out of money, and they don't know what to do. And their people are riding on the streets because they can't believe the money's gone, and the benefits and the promises are gone.
Right.
What do you think?
I mean, there's a global catastrophe right now of complete defunding of social services,
because they ran out of money.
Of public,
you know what happened, Keely? They just ran out of money.
Yeah.
Right?
I understand, but there is a 1% in Greece. There's a 1% in the United States. There's a 1%. There's a ruling class in absolutely every.
I don't doubt there is, Keely. I don't doubt there is, but obviously they've been trying to tap them to get money from, and they realize either they don't have the money or they hid from the money. They're gone. They're gone.
Yeah.
And now these countries are going
then those
bust.
people need to be accountable.
All right, fine, but they're smart and they're scurrying all over the globe. So now even if
they are, and that's a problem.
All right, but they've done studies on this, Keely. I don't want to get boring here, but even if you were to take the 1% and take all of their money, tax it 100%, do you know that couldn't keep Medicare, just Medicare in this country, going for 3 years? Did you know that?
If we're to a point where the rich is paying 100% on their taxes, then we're on the road to socialism, and we're going to have a completely different type of public infrastructure.
No, what I told you is that even if you took all the money from the rich who you say are getting away with murder, and you took it all away, it wouldn't support one entitlement in this country for 3 years.
I don't believe that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just don't. That sounds completely ludicrous to me.
Do you know how much it will cost to mandate a $15 minimum wage across the country, to have everyone's student loan debt paid off, to pay for public college for everyone?
How much?
You have a rough idea on the cost of just the educational part, on the student loan part and the public college part?
Absolutely. $1.3 trillion in student debt. That's just a beginning. And then billions and billions of dollars.
Do you know how much you get fully taxing the 1%? 100%.
I don't know. Is it close to the number, the $16 trillion that we spent to bail out the banks?
Hear what I'm saying, because I just want this to be a math reminder. $1 trillion, which would barely keep Medicare going for 3 years. That's one area. Even if we repositioned it to go into this area that you want, we don't have enough to do it. So you're going to have to find other means of getting money, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a starting point. I mean, I think that all of these things require really comprehensive programs.
No doubt. But do you fear, Keely? I guess what I'm asking you. You're passionate about this, and I admire that passion and your involvement in this, but I think you have to step back and look at the numbers that could be involved here, because they're going to be huge.
Right.
And a lot of those, a college behind you and institutions behind you, knowing that student debt is taken care of, it's forgiven and done, do you think any of those guys, any of those administrators, any of those schools aren't going to leap at the opportunity to gouge even more, to raise tuitions even more, to raise room and board even more?
Well, I mean, ideally, if we have a big enough mass movement of people in the streets, we can actually prevent things like that from happening. I mean,
the naivete of this individual, this so-called student leader, it goes beyond belief. When she talks about the top 1% hoarding all the wealth, well, they earned the wealth. They actually made that money or inherited it or something, and I don't know what to say other than there was a point where she said, if we take 100% tax, meaning you earn money and we take all of it. If you're in the top 1%, the only fair thing to do is take all of your earnings 100% tax, not 90%, not 80%, not 70%, 100%. We take all your money. She said, then we'll be on the road to socialism and we'll have a much different infrastructure. And she sounded like she was happy about it. I wish he would have followed up with her on that. Anyway, we'll take a break and continue discussing this. If you have any thoughts, 323-746-TALK is our number. We'll be right back. Well, I guess political correctness knows no party because there are a group of immigration activists. They're actually illegal alien activists. They're not immigration activists because immigration activists are people who are fighting for people who came here legally, not illegally. But they've scolded Democrat presidential candidate Hillary Clinton for using the term that they have determined to be offensive, illegal immigrants. So I guess Hillary is a racist. Hillary is a xenophobe. Hillary is a hater. And Hillary must be stopped. Earlier this week, during a campaign stop in New Hampshire, Clinton spoke about her efforts to secure the border. Whatever. It's okay. I want to hear this. She said, I voted numerous times when I was a senator to spend money to build a barrier to try to prevent illegal immigrants from coming in. And I do think you have to control your borders. She's trying to appeal to the blue-collar Democrat who's ticked off at the elitists that have hijacked their party, the Marxist progressives who are the enemy within. And you heard earlier with Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu, yes, a physical barrier makes a certain amount of sense. We're still waiting for them to build the 700 miles of secure fencing. Yes, fencing actually works. It's not a wall like Donald Trump is fond of saying. It's a physical barrier. It is 2 layers of fence that can't be climbed with a road in between. And the Border Patrol actually goes up and down that road. They look for any signs of anyone who's gotten through. But it's very difficult for people to get through it. And it's very easy with technology to see them and track them, which then aids the Border Patrol agents on the ground in their mission, which is preventing unlawful entry. That's all. And that unlawful entry is not always gardeners and people that you might consider to be harmless, even though there was an individual who was a gardener in Utah who came to California and killed 2 cops in one afternoon with an assault weapon. I don't know how he got an assault weapon since he's illegally present. You know, and that reminds me, I'm really curious about something because we have such insanely strict gun laws in California. It's out of control. It is so bad that if you want to buy a gun, it is a multi-store visit. You have to go there. You have to sign up for this. You have to take a class. You have to, pass a test. You have to do DROS. You have to do this, do that, background check. It's a nightmare. I'm sorry. And I love buying guns, but it's a nightmare. And it shouldn't be, because the people going through that are always law-abiding Americans, period. That's it. Criminals don't buy their guns that way. And I guarantee you, this illegal alien who came here and killed 2 cops, who everybody thought was the nicest illegal alien in the world, he was such a nice guy when he cut my lawn. Yeah. How did he get his assault weapon? I'm just curious. Oh, yeah, that's right. He had a driver's license. Yeah, let's give everyone in the country illegally a driver's license, and then let's let them vote. That's what we're doing here in California. And by the way, I've had a son who's joined the military, another one who is sort of in the process and exploring it. And today I had to take over to his school his birth certificate and his Social Security number. And it made me wonder, because I keep hearing that illegal aliens have served in our military. What documents do they give the recruiter? I'm just curious. I'm just flat out curious. I don't know if anybody knows, but I've heard those reports. They're discussed ad nauseum in the press as evidence that illegals are better than the rest of us. And why is it my son has to give an actual birth certificate, not a fake one, and an actual Social Security, not an identity stolen from someone else, so that he can go serve the country? Why do we always have a different set of rules? And that's exactly what I've been talking about all day with this college nonsense, with these whiners on college campuses who can't get over the fact somebody called them a name. You know what? Man up. Stand up for yourself. Stop being a whining crybaby and start being an American. You came to America or you grew up in America, and there's no excuse for you sitting around in your overprivileged college campus being paid for by taxpayers, whining about about stripping wealth from people who earned it, people who forged ahead in life and built something of value. We need to get back to challenging Americans to be greater than the generation before. And I'm afraid with this current crop, we're in trouble. Anyway, we seek to inform, educate, and engage every day. Thanks to Chief Engineer Sean McNeil, all of our sponsors, and you. God bless you and Godspeed. Tim Donnelly Show out.
What's so proud?